Welcome to the Dom Sub Devotion podcast. Every episode of Dom Sub Devotion is an authentic reflection of our real life in a loving 24/7 DS marriage. If you crave the passion and intensity of a power exchange dynamic inside of a deeply loving and intimate relationship, you've found the right place. You can always find more from us in the show notes and at infinitedevotion.com. Thank you for listening. Hello.
Hi.
So today, this is going to be fun. So we have a list of questions where the submissives could ask Andrew anything.
Like ask a Dom.
Yep. And we got a lot of great questions. So this might actually end up being 2 podcasts, which is fun because I love the Q&As.
There were 3 questions that we got so many times from so many different people. Some different version of these 3 questions. And we're going to leave these ones out for today and come back to them because we'll do a whole episode just on these 3 questions, maybe a live one. The 3 questions were, 1, how do I find a Dom? 2, how do I get my man to be more dominant? Or how do I invite my man into a Dom-sub relationship? Or some version of, as a submissive, how do I get this dynamic out of my relationship or draw it out? And the third one was, what do I do when my dominant's being a jerk? What do I do when my dominant is being withdrawn or pulling back or has a temper? How do I help him or fix that problem? Those 3 questions, we probably had a combined 20 people ask those 3 questions. So since it was such a 3 popular topics, we're going to go deeper into those in a future episode. We'll leave those aside for today because we have a good couple hours worth of them here.
All right. Are you ready?
I was born ready.
Perfect. Okay. First one. How do you manage the constant, relentless responsibility of being a dominant without getting overwhelmed? And is your relationship ever easy?
I love that question because there are a lot of assumptions baked into it. First of all, is the sense of responsibility in being a dominant relentless? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean it's hard. It's actually easier for me to be fully responsible. And I think a lot of times the responsibility gets equated with hard, with challenging, with overwhelming, with frustration, especially from someone in the submissive role who that sort of responsibility would feel very overwhelming and overbearing, right?
Yes.
But it's the opposite for me. For me, the relentless responsibility lets me create the life that I want, the relationship that I want. And it's only really a burden or challenging for me when I'm battling against resistance. Like if the more you're resisting me, then the more of a burden the responsibility feels like, because I'm really not able to step fully into responsibility when there's resistance present.
Right.
So is this relationship ever easy? Easier by the day, the more that I actually have the complete responsibility and the ability to lead you and us where I see as being right. Where it's a burden or where it's a challenge or where it's not easy is in those places where I'm still fighting against resistance that doesn't need to be there.
I would agree with all of that. It definitely feels easier for me too when I'm not in the overthinking and pushback. Absolutely.
We've got a couple of other questions where submissives ask about their side of it a little bit more, so we'll come to those later on here.
Okay. All right. What can dawn do to boost your dominance, especially on days when you're not, quote unquote, feeling it?
My first thought when I read that and hear that question is it's not your responsibility to boost my dominance. And it's not. But are there things that you can do to build me up on days that I'm having a rough day or when I'm just maybe a little bit out of it? Absolutely, there are. You know me pretty damn well at this point. We've been together for so long. You know what energizes me. And the number one thing that you can do to boost me on a day when I'm not feeling it is to be in yourself. It's not to do something for me to fix me. It's you being alive in yourself that really gives me energy, that builds me up or boosts me up. So do you know the things that turn me on, the things that excite me, the things I love? Doing those, always welcome and highly encouraged. But if I'm having a rough day, I don't see it as your responsibility to build me up. It's always your responsibility to be in yourself, in your body, in your pleasure, in your turn on, to the extent that you can. And you being able to be in that for yourself is the most nourishing and boosting thing for me.
Yeah. And I can see how that has played out. Absolutely. I love that. You talk a lot about not using forcefulness, but what about the cases where a submissive likes being forced or controlled?
What about those cases? Someone's blushing. This is really consent. This is a consent thing because force and control can be sexy, they can be fun, they can be kinky, they can be exciting. It's a lot of fun to play with that kind of power. And we most certainly do in our own ways. But the difference comes in here where consent has been, where we've come to some agreement on what it is that's being forced and controlled. When you're saying, take control of this part of my life, or take control of this, do what you want with me or to me, then inside of those boundaries of consent is my playground. Not using force, not using control. When I'm talking about that, I'm saying I can't try to force you or control you into getting what I want from you outside of those boundaries of consent or without having had some kind of conversation about what it is that I'm actually stepping into force or into control with.
And I guess I would just add, we've also talked about not forcing in the realm of you can't force me to feel a certain level of excitement or interest in a certain thing either.
Yeah. Emotions can't be forced and feelings can't be forced.
Right.
It's not possible. But if there are kinks, if there are turn-ons that involve playing with force and control, by all means, that's a very different animal.
Right. Good answer. I like it. What does it look like for a man to show up with an open heart?
So this kind of, the question kind of reminds me of like the 90s sitcom dads and this trope about the sensitive man, especially for any of us who were raised as like late Gen Xers or early millennials. There was kind of this soft, sensitive man of the 90s that was supposed to be very effusive with their feelings. And I think a lot of us think that that's what it means to have an open heart as a man, to talk about our feelings a lot and to be very expressive and emotional. But we have to remember that as men, our receptive polarity is our heart. A man with an open heart is not all about talking about his feelings. A man with an open heart is going to be very receptive to the feelings and the everything around him. A man with an open heart is going to be very non-reactive. He's going to be very empathetic to the way that other people are feeling. He's going to probably be very easily touched by the emotional experiences that other people are having. He's going to care a lot, but not make it about himself. That's what an open-hearted man who is dominant is going to look like. He's going to be open and receptive in his heart.
Beautiful. Ooh. Is there a way to meet dominants who have gone through your course?
Yes, there is. Reach out to me and let me know that you are interested in that, so that I can know that you are interested and available for being introduced to these men. And then as these men who have gone through or are going through this course, that are single and available and looking for submissive partners, I will try to make introductions. Side note for the men who are considering and who want to become dominants, if you're single, we have so many women, submissive women, beautiful women from all over the world that ask us to help them find a dominant. Every day. Like our DMs, our email, filled with women who are looking for dominant men. And I will try to make introductions. I'm not going to play matchmaker. I'm not going to make a relationship happen for you. But I will introduce people to each other in cases where I can make it happen. So just let me know.
Sounds fun.
It does sound fun. And I'm looking forward to being able to make more of those connections.
Now my brain is like, how can we have fun with that? Do you say please when you ask or tell Dawn to do something, even though you don't really need to ask since she has agreed to obey you?
Sometimes. I would say less than I used to when I was in the more of the nice guy mode. You've also asked me over time to be a little more commanding and a little less asking.
Yeah, there's a sexiness to it.
So it's something I had to get comfortable with, honestly. This is a part of my evolution has been, it felt very, it felt wrong for me to command you in our past. It hit a lot of really deep wounds in me that told me it wasn't okay to boss a woman around or tell her what to do. So over time, I would say I do less of that, but I do still sometimes say please. I will even say please when I command you. Please do this. So it's not a question. I'm not asking you or really giving you an option, but I am still having some manners, because we can be both commanding and kind. I think we can be commanding and gentle at the same time. It doesn't have to all be, back to the force thing, right? It doesn't have to all be forceful, like, do this now. But it can be, a lot of it's tone of voice, honestly. I see this with guys when I'm coaching them around how to bring bring dominant energy into their relationship. I can listen to their tone of voice and the way that they end statements, the way that they end questions, the way they end commands. And for the men out there, voice inflection makes a big difference. Because if I were to say, go get me a glass of water, or go get me a glass of water, the downward inflection at the end of a statement makes it sound more commanding. I could even say, please go get me a glass of water. And it can be very direct, and it can let you feel that sense of commanding energy while still being very kind.
And I think the range is extremely sexy, too. I like how you play with all of it.
One of the things that I've picked up on in myself in the way that I handle this, because a lot of this happens in flow, right? It isn't planned out. I'm not sitting here thinking about how I'm going to speak to you or how I'm going to inflect my voice. But if you're asking me questions where you are wanting me to make decisions around what are we doing, what are we having for dinner, whatever it is, those are the cases where I tend to be very direct and firm and say this. And in cases where it's a little bit more conversational, there's a little bit more softness to it because sometimes we're kind of sorting out something. So, yeah, sometimes I say please. Sometimes I don't ask at all.
Yeah. And there's always, in my opinion, room for conversation about it between the couple.
If you're a submissive and you want more commanding energy, or you would like a little bit softer energy, speak up for your needs. When you came to me and told me, there's one point you told me you're being too soft with me. You remember that?
Yep, I do.
Initially, that was like a kick in the shorts. And then after a little bit, I realized you were right. And then I had to sort out what that meant to be less soft without just getting cold.
Yeah. And in my case, to your defense, it was kind of necessary for a while just because of some of my past. And yeah.
Yeah, it's tough to be firm when you're walking on eggshells.
Well, yeah. And we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but just, my relationship with authority before just played into what felt good to me, but it has changed over time. So there's room for change. All right, next one here. How do I handle changing my mind when I consent to something, then later realize I'm not comfortable with it anymore?
This is integrity for a submissive. You're going to change your mind. Things are going to evolve. You might realize that something you thought you wanted before, you really were just doing to please a partner because you were afraid of losing them, for example, or you were afraid of saying no, and now you built some confidence and you realize that you want to say no, or something that used to be exciting just isn't anymore. You got to speak up. You have to use your voice. And you do get to change your mind. Consent is not a lifetime sentence. Just because you agreed to something once doesn't mean you agreed to it forever. Just because you've been enthusiastically participating in something and having fun with it for years doesn't mean that you can't say no tomorrow. You always get your no as a submissive. You always get a safe word. You always get a say in what you do and don't participate in. That's your safety. So how do you handle it? You speak up and you say, this isn't working for me anymore.
Amen to that. Yes.
Oh, and by the way, that can be really damn hard. Let's acknowledge the fact that that can be really challenging to speak up and say that. But the alternative now is you are putting your dominant in a position to violate your consent without even knowing that he's doing it. If he thinks that you are into something, that you want something because you always have, and now you don't anymore, but you don't speak up. Not only are you violating yourself and abandoning yourself, you're putting your dominant in a position where he is now violating your consent and doesn't even know it. And that's not fair to either one of you. You've got to speak up, especially in those cases. As uncomfortable as it is, you're putting both of you in a really, really shitty position if you don't.
And side note, if you're in a relationship where you don't have a no, that's a whole nother issue in and of itself. All right. Ooh. What do I do if my dominant is rude, mean, or has a bad temper? Ouch. Yikes.
Part of the fun of this for me is I'm watching you read the questions and react to the questions before and as you read them.
I know.
If your dominant is rude or mean or has a temper, you are not dealing with a man who is dominant. You're dealing with a man who is easily triggered and reactive. And you have to understand that those triggers, those reactive behaviors, are coming from his own pain. It doesn't make them okay. It does not justify him treating you poorly, being rude to you, being mean to you, having a temper, being hurtful. Doesn't justify it. But it comes from that sensitive heart I was talking about before. Men who were hurt as boys, which all of us were. We are all sensitive beings as men, and we were all hurt as boys. Some of us react to that pain by lashing out to defend that hurt part inside of us. And it is not your job as his submissive to fix him. It's only your job to A, love him if you choose to love him, but B, part of loving him is speaking up for how he hurts you and never protecting that man from the way that he makes you feel. For as long as you choose to stay in that relationship, you cannot protect a man from the way that he makes you feel. Because you're afraid of being abandoned, because you're afraid of him lashing out more. I said this a while back. If you want to make a man's temper worse, don't speak up for how it feels when he loses his temper. Because now you're teaching him that he can act that way and get you to back down or to shut up. You can never protect a man from how he makes you feel, because it will only reinforce that reaction that he's having to protect himself. He has to see that for himself. You cannot get in there and fix him. You have to speak up.
Amen again.
This is like church today. You keep saying amen if you start like throwing your hands in the air.
Take me to church. All right. Okay, this one. What do I do when my dominant becomes silent, cold, and indifferent? It makes me feel scared and lonely.
You feel that fear and you feel that loneliness. And again, like the last question, you don't protect him from how you feel. You don't shut those feelings down or stuff them. You have to express them. Because the only way that he knows how you are receiving him, how his actions are affecting you, is if you express it. He might not even understand what's going on inside of you if you just withdraw, pull back, and shut down and suppress. So any time that you're feeling something like that, you have to speak up. Because how he responds to that will tell you a lot about what you're dealing with that person. How he responds to you just also getting cold and afraid doesn't show you much of anything, because it just gets, the energy just dies between the two people.
Right.
If what you're receiving is hurting you, if it's making you feel afraid, you have to feel that fear. You have to let it be there to the full extent that you're feeling it and allow it to show, allow yourself to speak about it. Again, it's going to be hard. It's going to be scary. The reason that you don't is probably because of your own fear, your own reactions. You're both in triggered reactions here. So, yeah, you've always got to express how you feel, which starts with accepting that that feeling is there.
Common theme there in that word. How do you forgive and believe in your dominant after he does something hurtful? Even after he apologizes, it's hard to be vulnerable again.
Understandably so. If you're choosing to reestablish trust, there's going to be a period where the apology in words is only like the doorway to walk through. It's the actions, it's showing, and this doesn't just go for dominance, this goes for anyone. If trust has been violated, if someone's been hurt, it's not the words or the promises or the apologies, it's the actions that back those things up and the change in behavior that shows you whether or not that apology is sincere. So, how do you allow him the space to grow? Can you allow him the space to grow and evolve and improve from it if he's showing you through his actions that he is evolving and growing and changing and learning his lesson? Did he learn his lesson? Is it showing in his actions, or is he just apologizing to try to brush it under the rug? The other side of that is, if you do choose to open up and be vulnerable again by allowing this trust to be rebuilt, you have to actually allow yourself to get to a point where that trust is re-earned and that you are not pulling that thing back out and throwing it in his face for the rest of his life, because then you haven't actually allowed him to grow through it. And that takes some time, but there has to be a point where you actually choose to let go if the actions have shown you a change in behavior, A, and then B, if your felt sense of trust can be rebuilt, if you're able to trust again, then at some point you can move forward. What do you have to add to that?
I would say that expressing all of what you feel in response to it on an ongoing basis, because hanging on to and not sharing any of that can make it remain longer. And so there needs to be room for open conversation and laying down those feelings on an ongoing basis. I think that's necessary in order for the trust to be rebuilt. And it's a process that requires a lot of patience on both people.
Yeah. And forgiveness is something that it takes its own time to come to. But every single time that I've come to a point in my life where I've chosen to forgive someone who's hurt me in the past, that forgiveness is always primarily about me being able to let go. It's not condoning what that other person did to hurt me. It's not accepting that it's okay. It is saying that I'm choosing to let go of it because I'm not going to be affected by it anymore, because I want to move beyond it.
And it is a felt experience. It's
100%.
not just something that necessarily comes only from the mind. You need to be able to feel it, and it is possible if you want to.
What do we got next?
My dominant wants me to be polyamorous, but this feels very unhealthy for me. What do I do?
Speak up and share it. Common theme in a lot of these questions, you have to speak up for yourself. You have to stand up for yourself. You have to say what matters to you. And I'm not saying that this is the case in this particular thing, but we had other questions like this one. My dominant wants this. I don't. What do I do? Speak up for where you're at right now. Also, there are some things where it might be a no right now. Maybe someday later. Things that aren't a hard no forever, but that are a hard no now. This can help sometimes with sharing where you're at on these things as a submissive. Saying like, absolutely not right now, because polyamory doesn't feel safe to me. Maybe this relationship doesn't feel solid enough. Maybe I just can only handle being monogamous. And maybe if this is a thing for you that is a not right now, but I would be open to considering it sometime down the road if and when it feels good to me. And I can't say when that'll be. That could be years, it could be never, but it's not a no forever. Whether it's polyamory or some kink or, control in some area of life, whatever it is. A no right now doesn't necessarily mean a no forever, but you have to honor both of those things.
Yeah, I definitely have evolved in certain things. Things that were a no, changed my mind on later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fun to experience too.
Yeah, be open to changing your mind. Be open to evolving. And recognize that there were probably things in the past that you were not into or okay with, whether it's sexually or relationally or whatever, that now you are. We are evolving beings. We don't stay the same forever. But there can be a lot of fear around expressing a maybe and feeling like saying maybe means that you're going to eventually have to say yes.
Yeah, good point.
That's not necessarily the case. Maybes can turn into no's.
Absolutely. Are you born a submissive or can you become one? Great question.
It is a great question. There's no way to answer that, really, because so much of what we desire out of relationship and out of pleasure and everything else is context dependent. And it depends on our life experience and on the people that we meet and connect with. So we have another question coming up from someone who found this later in life, sounds like very much by surprise. So I don't think anyone is just born a submissive. Now, some people probably do have very high inclinations towards submission from birth or from a very young age. We've heard from people who at very, very young ages started having these, like some of these desires. Shockingly young ages in some cases. And that points at something. But just as many people find their way to this later in life, too. So, and to some extent, I will say it this way. Most women are feminine core beings. Most women are feminine at their core. Not all women, but most are. And I think that given the right people, the right scenario, the right amount of safety, that the majority of women would find enjoyment and pleasure in a loving, caretaking, taken care of submissive role to some extent.
I have so much I could say about that, but I'm not going to today. All right. How do we reconcile the societal expectations of being a strong, independent woman with being a submissive? It's exhausting. Yeah, just reading that question felt exhausting. I'm just kidding.
Before I answer that question, if you happen to be listening to this episode on audio, you might want to go over to YouTube and pick it up from this point, because Dawn looks so hot today. I'm finding myself having trouble concentrating, and I'm just like checking her out. Anyway, that's why we put these on YouTube. How do we
Thank you, by the way.
No, thank you. How do you reconcile strong, independent woman and submissive? Is like saying, how do I hear colors? You don't reconcile them. They're the opposite thing. Strong, independent woman is an opposite energy from an energetic, from a spiritual perspective. It's an opposite energy from submissive, because submissive means receptive. Submissive means following. Submissive means not in charge or in control. Strong, independent woman means the opposite of that. You're not going to reconcile those two energies. You're going to, if you're choosing both of them, it's going to be exhausting, because you're going to be like, it's like electricity going one way through a wire, and then if you had to stop all that electricity before you can start sending electricity back the other direction through a wire, it's going to be a constant back and forth. And it's going to be exhausting, because you're having to essentially shut yourself down and reboot the computer every single time that you're shifting this energy. So for the strong, independent woman who also craves submission, what this really looks like is learning what does it look like to live in a feminine expression in my day-to-day life? What does it look like to live a submissive life? It doesn't mean that you don't get to do anything. It doesn't mean that you don't get to even do the same things that you've been doing in life. It means you're going to have to take a different approach to them. And this is a lot of what we teach to women especially in our course Communion, is we're teaching you how to get back into your body, how to get out of your head, back into your body, so that you can live then from your heart. And instead of being, or assuming that you have to be in this hyper independent, strong, I can do it all by myself energy all the time, that you can live from your heart, that you can live from an expression of how you feel instead of living from drive.
Be willing to challenge yourself and your belief systems around what does all of that mean? Because if you are feeling both of those things, that's like cognitive dissonance in your body.
Yeah.
And so let them speak to you. What are your rituals around removing and putting different collars on Dawn?
This is one of my favorite things, because Dawn gets down on her knees next to the bed, and I gently and usually very intentionally take off whatever collar that she's wearing, carefully, not to pinch her hair or to pull her hair out. And then she will bow her head down and lift and hold her hair up while I put the new collar on her. And then I usually take a little moment to appreciate the sight of you and give you a kiss on the forehead. And then I offer you a hand and help you up.
And sometimes share some words with me.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I share some words that I wouldn't say on this podcast.
Maybe another day. All right. Here's a good one. I'm a single mom, and the more I've gotten into my feminine energy and submission, the more my small business has slowed down. I'd love some advice on maintaining and expanding successful business while remaining submissive to my dom.
this is a very similar thing to a couple of questions ago. It's no wonder that as you go more into your feminine energy, that the strong, independent, I can do it all by myself side of you, if that's where your small business is being driven from, is going to slow down because that energy is less and less present in you. So if you want to run a business and be in your feminine energy and be submissive, that business had damn well better be something that you are doing from your heart. It better be something that is deeply passionate for you and that you feel inspired to do. Because if you are just doing something for money, or because you have to, or you chose it because of something other than it really coming from your heart, the more you're in your feminine energy, the more that things that don't come from your heart aren't going to matter. And if this relationship starts to become a priority for you, and you are sinking out of your masculine energy, if you're not trying to jam electricity through that wire backwards anymore, then everything else that came along with that energy when it was getting jammed backwards through that wire is going to also go away. Just like I imagine the person who wrote that question probably feels less stress in their life, probably feels less stuck in overthinking patterns, probably feels more calm. There's probably a lot of other things that come with that submission if they're asking that question and they're noticing a slowdown in their business. It probably means that all of these other benefits that are coming along with her life are the same reason that that business is slowing down. Because, again, you can't do both at the same time. It doesn't work. Two things cannot occupy the same space.
Right. What's your position regarding patriarchy? And how do you fight it while having a hetero dom-sub relationship?
Now, I almost took this question out because a part of me didn't even want to answer it and open up this can of worms, but I decided to for one reason. There's a quote supposedly by Albert Einstein. I think it's misattributed to him maybe, but it doesn't matter. The point is what I'm after here. That you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. And if you see patriarchy as a problem, a part of what made that a problem was the collectivist ideology of men winning over women, or men winning at the expense of women. And to fight the patriarchy by doing the same thing, by creating a new class of individuals that's trying to beat down another class of individuals, you're causing the exact same problem that you say that you're trying to avoid, which is one group of people winning over another group of people. You're just trying to put yourself on the winning side of an equation, but you're creating the same problem, which is two groups of people against each other. All of the solutions to everything that is wrong in the world are individual. They are not collective. Collectivism is the problem. It's not the solution. So if you want to, for example, fight the patriarchy, what do? As a man, you love a woman. You really love her. And you bring all of yourself to her, and you heal yourself, and you improve yourself, and you make yourself the best man you can be. You don't fight a group of people by vilifying another group of people, because all that does is rise up resistance in equal measure to your hatred of them. We don't fix hatred by hating other people. It's individual. We have to show up in our lives and be the best we can be in our lives, in our relationships, and all of the problems go away when we stop identifying ourselves as member of groups and then making things into an us versus them. So that's my answer to that.
Thank you. Appreciated.
That's about the most controversial we'll probably get on this episode.
I love listening to you. Does submission eventually make it hard for women to be successful professionally and lead effectively if she gets comfortable following and not being in charge in her relationship?
I think it sure could. Kind of back to those couple of other questions about small business, and it's certainly possible. But it's also very possible that in some cases, a healthy expression of her submission inside of her relationship can make a woman a lot more assertive in other places, because it does take assertiveness to submit in a way that's safe and healthy. And those characteristics also carry over outside of the relationship. And when you bring more assertiveness and less codependency and less fear of speaking up into things like work situations where you're not submitting to someone, where you're not doing this speaking up and this assertiveness to set strong boundaries around where you're going to let go of control, where you're not worried about submitting, or you're not trying to give someone else or exchange power with someone in a consensual way, in some ways that might show up as a help, as an aid in more success professionally. It's certainly within the realm of possibilities, because I've said this before. I said this to you at the beginning of our dynamic. You are going to become less submissive in every other area of your life except for with me, where you're going to become far more submissive. That was a part of my selling points of this dynamic, as I was trying to show you why I thought it would be a good thing for you.
Yeah, and every profession is different, right? I mean, certain ones, I'm going to say this out loud, men are probably better equipped for because of the demanding nature of, certain professions. But then there's some that are going to probably be better for women, but it's all unique to you and like what is even driving your interest in the profession, You just have to be willing to challenge all of those things and find what's for you in all of it.
Yeah. If you're in a situation like the person a few questions ago, where you are in charge and in control of a lot, and you have to work really hard and drive really hard, and now you are learning to relax in your body, and all of a sudden these things don't feel good to you anymore, absolutely that could make that particular profession not as suitable for you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, you are so much more assertive, so much more outspoken. You stand up for yourself so much more than you did outside of me and apart from me before this dom sub dynamic started. That's not nothing either. It really does depend on it's context dependent, like everything else. There is no one size fits all to that. But there are certain things that you would be far more equipped to do now because of what you've learned through submission.
Well, right now I don't want to go work for anyone else.
That's okay. I've got you very busy here.
No, thank you. I mean, to working for someone else. All right, next one here. When and how did you discover your dominant side?
That's a tough question to answer, but it's something that to some extent has always been there, or it's been there for a very long time. And discovering it was a process really of accepting it, which I think most things that are authentic to any human being are inherent truths that need to be uncovered and accepted and then brought out of the shadow into the light, which this most certainly was for me. This was my desire to be dominant was very much something that felt wrong and shameful and not even possible for me, but it felt exciting. It felt like a turn on. So how I discovered it, in some ways, it's probably always been there. But also, like I said a little while ago, most women being feminine core beings, and most women would find themselves in some enjoyment of a submissive role if it fit their particular nature. I think most men also, being masculine core beings, would find themselves well suited to a dominant role that fit their individual nature. But that's all underneath unconscious programming. And that's why we talk so much about healing. It's why I talk so much to men about inner strength and healing your wounds, because uncovering the deeper truth about ourselves, we can't even really see it. There are things that have come to light for me in terms of desires and needs and deeply aligned soul callings for me that were so far repressed that I would have swore that they weren't even there. You've had the same thing.
Yeah. And I would add also that for a long time, I just saw myself as like, I'm just this way. And the Four Agreements opened my eyes and mind to a whole new perspective. And I started being willing to challenge my own programming, my own conditioning, my own beliefs, and recognizing that I can change them. And I can decide for myself now instead of just believing this thing that was always there or imposed upon me by my culture, society, parents, like church, whatever it was.
We met a couple, this was several years ago, out on our boat, where your caller got recognized by a couple of the women. They started asking about it. You started talking about it. And then one of those women went up on her boat to her husband and started telling him, see, this is what I want. This is how I want you to be. I want to be dominated. I want to be submissive. And I felt so bad for the guy because she just unloaded on him in front of everyone in such a demeaning way and disrespectful way to him by openly comparing him and telling him where he wasn't meeting her needs in front of a whole bunch of people that he didn't even know. It was awful. And his response was, I'm just not like that. I'm not that way. That's not how I am. And maybe not, but how could he ever admit that he is, or that he wants to, in that kind of context? So there has to be a little bit of grace with that if you are desiring more of that. Something we'll get into when we touch on those three big questions a little bit more.
Yeah. What is your favorite part of being a Dom?
You know that question we're back towards the beginning of this episode about what about when a submissive wants to be forced and controlled? It's playing in that energy inside of the realms of consent where you want to be controlled, where you want to be led, where you want me to take you somewhere, especially when it's somewhere that you really want to go and you haven't been able to figure out how to get there on your own. And when you say, do it, make me. And then I get to use all of my intelligence and all of my mind and everything that I am and everything that you are. And the end result is something better for you and more fun for me, where everything is improved by you letting go of control and me taking it. That is my favorite thing.
I know you're talking about specifics there. um, but I kind of feel like our whole relationship is based upon that foundation.
Everything that has worked really well has eventually worked well when it's gotten to that point. When you've gotten to the point of saying, I know I want it, make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're on board, you're participating in it with desire and actively willing to follow my lead. And then I'm able to step in and take that energy and bring you into whatever it is. That's everything that has worked the best and been the most exciting and fun for both of us. Every time.
I agree. All right. What are a dominant's deepest insecurities? And how do we submissives best support them?
Whether or not he is worthy of being in control of another person's life. Most insecurities have their root or their base in some sort of a self-worth issue. You mentioned the book, The Four Agreements, in decisions that we made about whether or not we were good when we were too young to know any better. And this is dominant men especially, just men especially, because men are and boys are created with such sensitive hearts. It's a part of being masculine is having a very sensitive heart. So boys are more easily hurt emotionally when they're young. Not to say girls aren't either. Boys are more easily hurt emotionally when they're young. So every man, to some extent, holds insecurity around his worthiness, around his value as a human being. And how can a submissive best support him? Show him by the way that you love him, by the way that you express yourself to him. Just love that man and show him that, at least to you, he's worthy. Mirror back acceptance to him. Show him that he deserves to have his desires met. Show him that he deserves to have his needs met. You can't fix this in him. He's going to have to work on it himself. But you can show him, through the way that you love him, an example of what he deserves. You can also hurt him even more by reflecting back rejection of his needs and his desires. And I think acceptance, even of things that are not maybe your thing, but mirroring acceptance of the fact that they exist, even if you're a no to it, is incredibly healing to any man because of that wounded heart and that insecurity. Because he probably rejects his own desires more than you realize and shuts himself down and suppresses himself more than a woman would ever realize because of that wounding. So being able to be accepted in the parts of himself that he does reveal is really, really important and valuable and helpful.
Good. Thank you for sharing. This kind of goes back to the other question that you already, or the three top questions. Where are all the doms like you hiding?
I know that this one goes back to those three questions, and this is probably a good place to end part one, because we are hiding underneath mushrooms in parks. No. Men like me are not hiding anywhere. I became this way, the way that people see me now, in relationship with you. I was not this man. So a man like me doesn't exist out there in the wild single. I can't become like this. A man cannot grow into this type of strength and solidity and groundedness alone. It's always going to be two broken people coming together and then finding their strength and their healing through each other and through these methods that we teach. Really, it's not the only way, the way that we talk about it. It's what worked for us, and it seems to work pretty well for anyone who wants to follow it. I don't think it's the only way to get there, but men like me are like we are because someone loved us and we loved someone enough to grow together in relationship.
Thank you for choosing me.
I made a good choice.
So did I.
So thank you for tuning in for part one of Ask a Dom Anything. We will pick this up with part two in an upcoming episode where I will continue answering the rest of this book of great questions. So
thanks again for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for asking them and being the host today.
It's fun for me. You're welcome.
We'll see you next time.